If you ever feel like someone is watching you, don't ignore it, because the night I did, it almost cost me everything. The house was too quiet for a Tuesday, the kind of silence that hums in your ears and makes every small sound feel too loud. And I remember standing in my kitchen, barefoot on cold tile, staring at my phone like it might tell me why my chest felt tight. The clock read 2:13 a.m. I shouldn't have been awake, but something felt off, like the air had shifted without asking permission. Then I heard it. Not loud, not dramatic, just a soft click from the front door, like someone testing if it was locked. My breath caught. I told myself it was nothing, maybe the wind, maybe the old frame settling the way it always did in colder weather. But my hands were already shaking before I could finish the thought. I moved slowly, every step careful, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might echo through the walls. Another sound, this time closer. Wood brushing against wood. The door opening. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I just froze, because some part of me knew that panic would make noise, and noise would give me away. My phone was still in my hand, screen lighting up my face in the dark, and without thinking, I opened my messages. His name was still there from weeks ago. Adrian Volkov. I hesitated for half a second, thumb hovering, because we barely knew each other, because he wasn't the kind of man you text unless you mean it, because once you pull someone like him into your life, you don't get to push them back out. Another step echoed from the hallway. Closer. I stopped thinking. I typed one word. Help. And I hit send. The message delivered instantly. Read almost just as fast. My stomach dropped. Somewhere across the city, he had seen it. I didn't know what he would do. I didn't know if he would come. I just knew I wasn't alone in knowing what was happening anymore. I slipped behind the kitchen counter, crouching low, trying to make myself smaller than I felt. Every second stretching into something unbearable as the footsteps moved through my living room like they belonged there. My pulse roared in my ears. My fingers tightened around the edge of the counter. And then, from outside, the silence shattered. Engines. More than one. Tires against pavement. Doors opening in sharp, controlled rhythm. The kind of sound that doesn't ask questions. The kind that answers them. And in that moment, before I even saw him, I realized something I couldn't take back. I hadn't just asked for help. I had chosen who was going to answer it. I did not move when the engine stopped, because something in the way they arrived told me this was not chaos. This was control, and the footsteps inside my house hesitated for the first time, like whoever was there had just realized they were no longer the only one deciding what happened next. And I stayed crouched behind the counter with my breath held so tight it burned, listening as the silence shifted, heavy and charged, until a car door closed outside with a precise, final sound that seemed to settle everything into place. And then I heard it, a voice, low and calm, not raised, not rushed, but carrying through the walls like it did not need permission to be heard. And I knew it was him before my mind could even process the name. Adrian Volkov was here, and somehow that made my hands shake more, not less, because safety had never sounded like that before, not cold, not controlled, not like it came with consequences. And the air inside the house felt different now, like the balance had tilted, like whatever had stepped into my home had just stepped into something far bigger than me. And I heard movement again, quicker this time, uncertain, retreating maybe, I could not tell, but I knew they had heard him too, because anyone would have, and I pressed my palm against my mouth to keep from making a sound as another voice came from outside, quieter, closer to the door, as if someone stood right there. And then the front door opened again, but this time it was not careful, not testing. It was deliberate, and footsteps entered that did not belong to fear, and everything in my chest loosened and tightened at the same time. Because I had called him, and he had come, and that meant something I was not ready to understand yet. And then I heard it, closer now, just beyond the kitchen, his voice again, softer but somehow more dangerous. Saying only a few words, asking a question that was not really a question at all, and I realized he already knew I was here. He had known the moment he stepped inside, and my body reacted before my thoughts did, shifting slightly, just enough to make the faintest sound against the cabinet. And for a split second I panicked, thinking I had given myself away to the wrong person. But the next thing I felt was the presence of someone stepping into the kitchen, stopping just on the other side of the counter, not rushing, not searching, just there, like he had always been meant to stand exactly in that spot. And I could feel it without seeing him, the weight of his attention, focused, unshaken, and then his voice, right above me now, quieter than before but cutting through everything. "Emily," he said, like he had every right to say my name, like he had been saying it for years, and I finally looked up, slowly, because I was afraid of what I would see in his eyes, afraid of what it would mean that he had come for me like this. But when I met his gaze, the world seemed to narrow into something sharp and clear, and for the first time since the door had opened, I could breathe, even though something deep inside me whispered that this was not the end of the night. It was only the beginning of something I would not be able to walk away from. He did not reach for me right away, and somehow that made my heart beat even louder, because it meant he was not reacting. He was assessing, and there was something terrifying about a man who chose control when anyone else would have rushed, and I stayed where I was for a second too long, caught between relief and something else I could not name, until his hand moved, slow and deliberate, stopping just short of touching me like he was giving me the choice to come to him instead, and I realized then that even now, even here, he was not forcing anything, and that made it worse, because it made me step forward on my own, my fingers brushing against his sleeve, grounding myself in something solid, something real, and he finally closed the distance, his hand steady at my shoulder, not tight, not claiming, just there, confirming that I was unhurt, that I was still here, and his eyes searched my face in a way that felt too intense for someone who barely knew me, like he was memorizing every detail, like he was making sure nothing had been taken from me in the moments before he arrived. And when he spoke, his voice was lower now, meant only for me, asking if I was okay, and I nodded even though my throat felt tight, even though the word did not fully belong to how I felt, because okay did not begin to explain the way the night had shifted around me. And he seemed to understand that without me saying it, his gaze softening just enough to take the edge off the tension, but not enough to make me forget who he was. And behind him I became aware of movement, quiet, efficient, the kind that did not draw attention to itself but changed everything in the room. And I knew his men were there without needing to see them, knew that whatever had come into my house was no longer a threat, in the way it had been minutes ago, and that realization sent a strange chill through me, because the fear I had felt before had been simple, but this was something deeper, something tied to him, to the fact that I had called him, and he had answered without hesitation, and as if sensing the direction of my thoughts, his hand shifted slightly, guiding me to stand fully, to step out from behind the counter and into the open space of the kitchen, where the light from outside filtered in, through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor, and I noticed then how still everything had become, how the house no longer felt like mine in the same way it had before, like the moment I sent that message, I had handed something over without realizing it. And he followed my gaze around the room, taking in the details with a precision that made me wonder what he saw that I did not, what he was already planning. And then he looked back at me, his expression settling into something firm, decided, and he spoke again, not a question this time, not even a suggestion, but a statement delivered with quiet certainty, telling me that I was not staying here tonight. And the way he said it left no space for argument, not because he raised his voice, but because he did not need to, and I felt the weight of that settle over me, the understanding that the moment I had reached out, I had stepped into his world in a way that could not be undone, and as I stood there in my own kitchen, surrounded by a silence that no longer belonged to me, I realized that safety, when it came from someone like Adrian Volkov, was not just protection. It was a line you crossed without knowing how far it would take you. The word no formed in my chest before I could stop it, not because I wanted to stay, but because leaving with him felt like stepping into something I could not measure, something that would not let me return unchanged, and I shook my head slightly, instinct fighting against the calm certainty in his voice, trying to hold on to the version of my life that existed before tonight, the one where I made my own decisions without someone else quietly overriding them. And he watched me do it without interrupting, without pushing, his expression unreadable in that way that made it impossible to tell if he was being patient or simply waiting for me to realize something on my own. And the silence stretched between us, not empty, but heavy with everything that had already happened, everything that could still happen if I stayed here alone. And I glanced toward the hallway, toward the door that had opened without permission, and the memory of that soft click came rushing back, sharp and immediate, and suddenly my house did not feel like a place I could defend. It felt like a place that had already failed me once, and my hesitation cracked, just enough for him to see it, just enough for him to step closer without crowding me, his presence steady, unshaken, like he had already accounted for every possible outcome of this conversation. And when he spoke again, his voice was quieter, but firmer, not controlling, not forceful, just absolute in a way that left no room for doubt. Telling me that whoever had come here would know this address, would know I was alone, and would not assume I suddenly became untouchable just because I survived. One night, and I swallowed hard, because he was right, because the fear that had been sitting just beneath my skin since the door opened had not disappeared. It had only shifted shape, and now it was pressing against my ribs again, reminding me that staying meant waiting for something I could not predict, and he did not rush me even then, did not reach for my hand or pull me toward the door. He simply stood there, letting the truth settle, letting me feel the weight of my own choice, and that, more than anything, made it impossible to ignore, because it meant I could not pretend I was being dragged into this. I was stepping into it, and I exhaled slowly, the tension in my shoulders giving way as I nodded once, small but certain, and something in his gaze shifted in response, not relief, not victory, just acknowledgement, like he had expected nothing less. And with that, everything began to move, subtle at first. A door opening somewhere behind him, quiet footsteps repositioning, the world outside my kitchen already adjusting to the decision I had just made. And he turned slightly, not away from me, never fully away, but enough to signal that it was time, that we were leaving, and I hesitated only for a second before taking a step forward, my bare feet cold against the floor, my house suddenly unfamiliar in a way that made it easier to walk away from it. And as I reached his side, he slowed just enough for me to keep pace, not leading, not pulling, but ensuring I was not left behind. And when we crossed the threshold of my front door, the night air hit my skin, cool and sharp, carrying with it the low hum of engines and the presence of men who did not speak unless necessary. And I saw them then, silhouettes against headlights, still, controlled, watching everything without seeming to look directly at anything. And it should have made me nervous. It should have made me question everything. But instead, standing there beside him, I felt something else, something unfamiliar and dangerously close to certainty. And as he guided me toward the waiting car, opening the door with a simple, practiced motion, I realized that the moment I stepped inside, I was not just leaving my house behind, I was leaving the version of my life that had existed before I sent that message, and there was no guarantee I would ever find my way back to it. I hesitated at the open car door, not because I wanted to turn back, but because stepping inside felt final in a way I could not explain, like crossing a line that did not have a visible boundary until you were already past it. And Adrian did not rush me, his hand resting lightly against the edge of the door, waiting, steady, giving me the space to decide, even though everything about this night had already pushed me here. And I glanced back once, over my shoulder, at the house that was supposed to be mine, the place where I had felt safe just hours ago. And now it looked different, smaller somehow, like it had already let me go. And the lights from the cars stretched across the yard, cutting through the darkness in sharp lines that made everything feel exposed. And I realized I did not recognize this version of my own life anymore. Not after what had happened, not after who I had called. And that realization settled something inside me, quiet but certain, and I ducked into the car, the leather seat cool against my skin, the door closing behind me with a soft, solid sound that seemed to seal the decision in place. And for a moment, I just sat there, hands in my lap, listening to the muffled world outside, the low voices, the distant hum of engines, the subtle movement of people who operated without hesitation. And then Adrian slid into the seat beside me, the space shifting instantly with his presence, controlled, composed, like everything around him moved according to rules I did not yet understand. And the car began to move before I could ask where we were going, smooth and deliberate, pulling away from the curb as if it had been waiting for this exact moment. And I watched through the window as my house disappeared behind us, shrinking into the distance until it was just another shadow on a quiet street. And something in my chest tightened, not regret, not exactly, but the awareness that I had just left something behind without knowing if I would ever return to it the same way. And I turned slightly, glancing at him, trying to read something in his expression, any sign of what this meant, what came next, but his gaze was forward, focused, like he had already moved beyond this moment and into whatever came after, and I realized that for him. This was not a disruption. This was part of a pattern, a world where decisions were made quickly and followed through without hesitation, and the thought made me shift in my seat, grounding myself, reminding myself that I was still here, still choosing, even if the path ahead was no longer entirely mine. And after a few minutes, he spoke, his voice calm, even as if we were discussing something ordinary instead of the fact that I had just been taken from my own home in the middle of the night, asking if I trusted him. And the question caught me off guard, not because it was complicated, but because it was simple in a way that made it impossible to answer lightly. And I opened my mouth, then closed it again, searching for something honest, something that would not feel like a mistake the moment I said it. And the truth sat there, undeniable, shaped by everything that had just happened, by the way he had come without hesitation, by the way he had stood in my kitchen like nothing could reach me as long as he was there. And I exhaled slowly, meeting his gaze this time, and I said yes, even though I did not fully understand what that meant yet. And something in his expression shifted, subtle but real, like he had been waiting for that answer not because he needed it, but because it changed something between us, something unspoken but already binding. And as the car carried us further into the night, away from everything familiar, I realized that trust, when given to someone like him, was not just a feeling, it was a decision that came with consequences I was only beginning to see. The car did not slow down as we moved deeper into the city, and I lost track of where we were after a few turns, the streets blending into each other under the dim glow of streetlights and passing headlights. And I realized that for the first time in a long time, I had no control over where I was going, no familiar landmarks to anchor me, just the quiet certainty that the man beside me knew exactly where we were headed, and that thought should have made me uneasy. But instead it settled somewhere in the space between fear and trust, something unfamiliar that I could not quite name, and I shifted slightly in my seat, my fingers brushing against the edge of the door as if to remind myself that it was real, that I could still choose to open it if I needed to, even though I knew I would not now, not after everything that had already happened. And Adrian seemed to notice the movement without looking directly at me, his awareness quiet but constant, like he did not miss anything that happened within his reach. And after a moment, he spoke again, his voice low enough that it did not carry beyond the space we shared, telling me that we were almost there. And something in the way he said it made my chest tighten, not with fear, but with anticipation, because wherever there was would not be neutral ground. It would be his world, fully and completely. And I was about to step into it without any illusion of distance left between us. And when the car finally slowed, it was not in front of a house like mine, not a quiet street with familiar neighbors and predictable routines, but a gated entrance that opened before we even came to a full stop, the metal sliding aside with smooth precision as if it had been expecting us. And the car moved forward without hesitation, carrying us into a space that felt removed from everything I knew, the noise of the city fading behind us, replaced by something quieter, more controlled. And I sat up slightly, my gaze drawn to the building ahead, large but not ostentatious, its presence defined more by the way everything around it seemed to align with it, as if the entire space existed to serve a purpose I did not yet understand. And when the car came to a stop, I hesitated again, not out of doubt this time, but because I felt the weight of the moment pressing down on me, the awareness that stepping out would mean accepting whatever came next without pretending it was temporary. And Adrian stepped out first, the door opening on his side, the movement fluid and unhurried, and then he was there beside me, opening my door with the same quiet efficiency, his hand offering support without demanding it. And I took it, because at this point, pretending I could navigate this alone felt less honest than acknowledging that I was already part of something larger than myself. And as I stepped out, the ground felt different under my feet, solid in a way that made me aware of every movement, every breath, and I looked around, taking in the stillness, the absence of randomness, everything placed exactly where it was meant to be. And it struck me then that this was not just where he lived, this was where he ruled, and the difference mattered more than I expected. And he did not speak immediately, giving me time to absorb it, to feel it, before his voice cut gently through the silence, telling me that I was safe here, And I believed him, not because the place felt welcoming, but because he said it like a fact, not a reassurance. And as we walked toward the entrance, his presence steady beside me, I realized that safety, in his world, was not something you felt, it was something he decided, and the moment he did, everything else adjusted around it. The moment we stepped inside, the world shifted again, quieter, heavier, like even the air knew this place did not tolerate chaos, and I slowed without meaning to, my eyes moving across the space, taking in the clean lines, the muted lighting, the kind of detail that did not demand attention but held it anyway, and Adrian did not rush ahead. He matched my pace, just slightly behind and to my side, as if making sure I did not feel pushed forward, but also not giving me the option to fall back. And the door closed behind us with a soft click that echoed more than it should have, sealing off the outside world in a way that felt deliberate, final. And for a second, I just stood there, unsure of where I was supposed to go, what I was supposed to do, because nothing about this place felt casual, nothing felt like it happened by accident, and I became aware of someone approaching from deeper inside the house. Footsteps measured and controlled, stopping a few feet away, and I turned. Slightly, catching a glimpse of a woman in a simple, elegant uniform, her posture straight, her expression calm but observant, like she had already assessed me before I even looked at her, and Adrian spoke to her in a tone I had not heard before, still quiet, still controlled, but different, sharper at the edges, giving instructions I did not fully catch, except for one word that stood out clearly, guest, and the way he said it made something in my chest tighten, because it felt like a label placed carefully, intentionally, and the woman nodded once, her attention shifting to me with a professionalism that did not feel cold, but also did not invite familiarity, and she gestured slightly, offering to guide me, and I hesitated, glancing back at Adrian without thinking, and he met my gaze immediately, as if he had been expecting it, and for a moment, everything else faded into the background, the space, the people, the weight of where I was, and it was just him, steady, certain, and he gave a small nod, not commanding, not distant, just enough to tell me that this was part of the process, that I was not being handed off, I was being taken care of, and that distinction mattered more than I expected, and I followed her, my steps quieter than they had ever been, as if the house itself demanded it, and we moved through a hallway that seemed longer than it should have been, the walls lined with subtle details that spoke of intention rather than decoration, and I realized that nothing here was random, everything had a place, a purpose, and that thought made me feel both out of place and strangely aware, like I was stepping into a system that had already decided where I fit, even if I had not agreed to it yet. And when she opened a door and stepped aside, I paused at the threshold, taking in the room, the soft lighting, the calm atmosphere that contrasted so sharply with the chaos of the night I had just left behind, and she spoke gently, telling me I could rest, that I would be safe here, and I nodded, even though the word safe had taken on a different meaning in the last few hours, and as I stepped inside, the door closing quietly behind me, I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding, my shoulders finally lowering just slightly, but the silence in the room did not feel empty. It felt temporary, like something was still waiting just beyond it, and I moved further in, my fingers brushing lightly against the edge of a table, grounding myself in something real, something present, and I realized then that even though I was no longer in danger the way I had been before, I was not free from the night either, because everything that had happened had led me here, to this place, to him, and as I stood there alone for the first time since I sent that message, one thought settled quietly in the back of my mind, steady and impossible to ignore. I had not just been saved, I had been brought somewhere I did not yet understand how to leave. Sleep did not come easily. Even though the room was quiet and the bed felt softer than anything I was used to, because every time I closed my eyes, I saw the door opening again, heard that faint click that had changed everything, and I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence, trying to understand how I had gone from my small house on a quiet street to this place, where even the air felt controlled, and I realized that it was not just the events of the night that kept me awake. It was him, the way he had appeared without hesitation, the way he had spoken like the outcome was never in question, and the more I thought about it, the more it unsettled me, because no one had ever shown up for me like that before, not without conditions, not without something expected in return, and yet he had come the moment I asked, and I did not know what that meant, or what it would cost me later, and eventually. Exhaustion pulled me under for what felt like minutes rather than hours. Because the next thing I knew, soft light was filtering through the curtains, pale and unfamiliar, and for a second, I forgot where I was, my mind reaching for something normal, something grounded, until the room came into focus and the memory of the night returned all at once, sharp and undeniable. And I sat up slowly, my body stiff, my thoughts still catching up, and I swung my legs over the side of the bed. The floor cool beneath my feet, anchoring me in the present, and I stood there for a moment, just breathing, reminding myself that I was safe, even if I did not fully understand what that meant here. And after a few minutes, I moved toward the door, opening it carefully, stepping into the hallway that was just as quiet as it had been the night before, as if nothing ever disturbed this place unless it was allowed to. And I followed the corridor instinctively, drawn by the faint sound of movement. Somewhere ahead, until I reached a larger open space where morning light stretched across polished floors, and that was where I saw him, standing near a wide window, his back partially turned, one hand resting casually at his side, the other holding a glass of something dark, and he looked exactly the same as he had the night before, composed, controlled, like sleep was optional for someone like him. And for a second, I just watched, unsure if I should announce myself or turn back, but he spoke. Before I could decide, his voice steady, almost quiet, acknowledging my presence without needing to look directly at me. And I stepped forward slowly, drawn into the space despite the part of me that still wanted to hold on to distance. And when he finally turned, his eyes found mine immediately, sharp and assessing, but not unkind. And there was something else there now, something quieter than before, something that had not been there in my kitchen or in the car, and I realized it was because this was his world, not the chaos of the night, not the urgency of a call for help. This was where he existed when nothing was wrong, and I was standing in it, uninvited by anyone except him. And that thought settled heavily in my chest as I stopped a few feet away, unsure of what came next, until he spoke again, asking if I had slept. And the simplicity of the question caught me off guard, because it felt so normal, so out of place compared to everything else, and I nodded slowly, even though it was not entirely true, and he watched me for a moment longer, like he was measuring something I could not see, before he set the glass aside, his attention shifting fully to me, and there was a pause. Then, a quiet space where the night and the morning seemed to overlap, and I realized that whatever happened next would not just be about what had already happened. It would be about what he decided to do with me now that I was here. And for the first time since I sent that message, I felt something new settle beneath everything else. Not fear, not relief, but the quiet awareness that being in his world meant the rules were no longer mine to understand first. They were his to reveal when he chose. He did not answer right away, and that silence stretched just long enough to make me aware of every small detail. The way the light hit the floor between us, the faint sound of something moving far down the hall, the steady rhythm of my own breathing, and I realized he was giving me time, not because he needed it, but because he expected me to understand the weight of whatever he was about to say. And when he finally spoke, his voice was calm, measured, like he had already considered every angle before deciding what I needed to hear, telling me that what happened last night was not random, that someone had come to my house with purpose, and the words settled heavily in my chest, confirming what I had tried not to think about since I woke up, that this was not over, that it had never been just one moment, and I felt my fingers tighten slightly at my sides as I processed it, my mind already racing ahead, trying to connect things that did not yet make sense. And he watched me, without interrupting, his gaze steady, letting me reach the conclusion on my own. And when I looked back at him, searching for something more, he stepped closer, not invading my space, but closing the distance just enough to make it clear that this conversation was not distant, it was personal. And he told me that until he understood who had come for me and why, I was not going back. And there it was again, that quiet certainty, not framed as an order, not softened into a suggestion, just stated as fact. And a part of me wanted to resist it, wanted to remind him that my life existed outside of this place, that I had responsibilities, routines, a version of myself that did not belong to his world. But the memory of that door opening, of the fear that had rooted me to the floor, came back too quickly, too clearly, and the words caught in my throat before they could form, and he seemed to recognize that hesitation, because his expression shifted slightly, not softer exactly, but more deliberate, like he was choosing his next words carefully, and when he spoke again, his voice dropped just enough to make it feel like something meant only for me, telling me that I did the right thing by reaching out, that I was safe because I chose to be, and something about that phrasing made my breath catch, because it reframed everything, not as something that happened to me, but as something I had actively stepped into, and I held his gaze, trying to understand the meaning behind it, trying to figure out where I stood in all of this, and the answer came in the way he looked at me, not distant, not detached, but focused, like I was now a variable he intended to protect, to manage, to keep within his control until the situation was resolved, and that realization should have made me step back, should have made me question everything, but instead it settled into something quieter, something steadier, because for the first time since the night began, the uncertainty had direction, even if it was not mine, and I nodded slowly, not in full agreement, not in complete understanding, but in acceptance of what I could not yet change, and he watched me for a moment longer before stepping back, just enough to restore the space between us, the tension easing but not disappearing, and as he turned slightly, already moving forward, already thinking beyond this moment, I understood something that I could not ignore, something that would follow me no matter how this ended, that the night I sent that message did not just bring him to me, it brought me into his world, and now that I was here, everything about my life would be shaped by how he chose to protect it.